All right. Hey, good morning, everybody. Well, morning for me, afternoon, I think, or late morning for a lot of you. Thanks for joining. As I mentioned in the pre-chat, just get together. Like the idea of the fireside chats is just that we do choose a topic and we come up with a rough outline, simply because to keep us on task and to have a target of what we want to do. The idea for these is to keep it around the Tesseract innovation space and how it affects not only us, but the A4 enterprise and honestly just the Air Force enterprise. We have so many things just going on. And the idea is just for this forum is to bring people together for a conversation and hopefully more collaboration. We talk about safe spaces. I actually like them, and this is one of those. So like this is a place to bring your ideas, bring something that's value added, find people that are working on things that you're interested in or things that you've never even heard about, and start connecting at your different levels throughout the enterprise and the Air Force. And then through that, the goal is just to make things better. So last week, our topic was talent management. Some of the things we talked about were the systems we have in place currently, and how innovation is working through those. And then the goal this week is, and a practice that I've done once before, but something maybe we can do as a small group, is talk about what the system might look like if you were allowed to change it, and then how we can start implementing some of those changes at the different levels that we're at. So with that, I just want to say, hey, I think we got what, 5 people in the recording this week. So that's pretty good. So good morning, good afternoon to everybody, and welcome to Tesseract LNO Fireside Chat. So for this week, to start off, I'm not sure if everybody saw this, but I'm going to take Chief Bass's memo about standards and try to spin that into innovation space and what it might look like towards innovation. I think as leaders and honestly as Air Force members, we need to keep our button on what's going on not only throughout the world, but in the Air Force. And a part of that is staying up to date with what our leaders are talking about and what they're highlighting. Yesterday, SEMSAF sent out a memorandum to everybody highlighting standards, orders, and discipline. The couple things that I wanted to pull from that, as I think it fits this space, is she mentioned capabilities and readiness, specifically to the expansions of China and Russia and their aggression, and how we have to be prepared to combat that. And then also keeping in line the idea of accelerating or changing and aligning that with our high standards. I didn't get the name of the person who made this comment on one of the Facebook feeds that I follow, but I thought it was a great comment. So I took the time to highlight it, and I'll read it to you guys here. It just says, not enough people are taking smart risks or creating and sharing bold ideas to meet changing demands and the need for innovation. When people are afraid of being put down or ridiculed for trying something new and failing, or even putting forward a new idea, the best you can expect is status quo and groupthink. So I wanted to bring that to you guys today, just to get your thoughts on what that comment kind of means to you, what it means in the realm of talent management, and your thoughts on how that would align with our high standards.
Brandon,
can you repeat that one more time?
Because
I think I have something for it, but like I want to make sure that I heard it right.
The comment or the idea?
Yeah, the comment.
All right. So the comment in the response to ensuring that we are upholding high standards for the need of readiness in the idea and the movement of accelerating change was, not enough people are taking smart risks or creating and sharing bold ideas to meet changing demands for the need of innovation. When people are afraid of being put down or ridiculed for trying something new or failing, or even putting a new idea forward, the best you can expect is status quo and groupthink.
Yeah, that's So that's pretty simplified, right? So like always when you get a blurb comment like that, it's always open to personal bias and how you rate it within that environment. So breaking it down, what's their definition of a smart risk?
Sure.
It's that completely subjective within their environment. When it comes to talent management itself, is that you still have generational cultures that are kind of clashing with each other in certain environments. And so everybody's risk mitigation is different. We talked about that a little bit last week during our discussion, and it really comes down to when you want to infer into talent management is what do you deem as talent and what's important to you within that environment. When it comes to standards within organizations and talent, when it comes into innovation, everybody's standards are quite different. And so you're trying to create this baseline with no baseline actually present. And because of that, you're going to constantly have a wave in and out of why it's important, why it's not. And then I always feel bad. I feel like we don't show empathy to upper leadership within the environment because they don't. Like, I have an 11-year-old, right? He's at a summer camp right now as we're getting ready to PCS. I know he's there, but at any point during the day, he might not be there, right? Like, so now you have all these airmen and guardians across the globe, and you're supposed to control that environment to the best of your ability. Like, okay, good luck, right? But people don't show empathy to that, and then they just point and they say, hey, we want this fixed. Okay, so how do you fix it? And then Dr. Wendy Walsh put in a very good perspective for me and a good friend, Kyle Ingram, at one point. And because we were talking about having an organic environment, she says, I believe that she refers to the Air Force as more of a chaos theory. And if you actually look up the definition and whatnot, there's a very good example of how like it's a forest with like creeks and rivers and lakes and trees and all this stuff. And it can be a very fragile ecosystem when you introduce something such as the innovation ecosystem has kind of been introduced. So it can become very chaotic and a rapid amount of change. And it can either fail very quickly or it could thrive and grow into something better. But certain components of that, either way, during the change kind of dies off. So I believe that that's one person's opinion. But then I'll open it up to thoughts when it comes to that.
I like the idea that kind of how you express that people underemphasize with leadership. And I think that a good touching point for this is that, the DoD is like a $2 trillion entity, which is basically dwarfs any enterprise, like any private enterprise that's ever existed. Google is less than 1 trillion, right? We think of that as like infinitely far reaching. So it is easy to, I think, being the guy on the ground, I think it's easy to lose track of, the concerns that the standards are meant to address and that talent management is meant to address. And I think that intersection of innovation is a tricky one, kind of like you guys said. And to see both sides of the intent of the original memo and the marriage with that comment is that you need to take calculated risks, like they said, smart risks, but that includes doing your research about the actual situation as is laid out in the standard and identifying the smallest part of a standard that you actually think needs changed and not kind of taking a bigger bite than you can chew. If that makes sense. That's kind of where I see this. And working at Tesseract, we see this a lot with people coming to us with ideas, and they're awesome ideas, and they're 100% worth encouraging. But it's also usually worth like really making sure that the person is considering the standards and considering why they're there before they take undue risk, right? And I think that's probably the biggest takeaway from that comment.
Oh, that's good. So how can we create, I guess, a system that would encourage that risk? And then what would be a standard of an acceptable risk? And can that even be definable?
I think if people started small, and it's a big risk to be transparent, and I harp on this all the time, and I try to get better with it. But being transparent in what you're trying to get after and what your focus is, because a lot of times, we're intended to understand commander's intent, but it's not always outlined, and it's pretty vague or it's pretty broad to give us wiggle room within certain boundaries. But then it gets misinterpreted as it trickles down because there isn't a transparent layer. There's refined guardrails. Whereas if we were more transparent, even from the bottom up and the top down, as leaders or as like subordinates, I think that would be, in my mind, like the ideal stepping stone for risk, right? Like, because then once you associate, oh, that's a risk, sharing too much information or being too transparent might inhibit the actual intent. Because those are like silly things that always come up, but it's not always the truth, in my personal opinion.
I like that perspective, Barry, because then we're free to make movement, but it doesn't always succeed, right? I think the biggest component is that we see at lower levels is some people try and justify their existence with it, when in reality we shouldn't be trying to justify our existence at all, because just living is justification enough in that environment. And then how do we react to the failure component? You travel a lot of us have traveled a lot over the past couple of years when it comes to innovation, and we see places to where they tried and they failed and they just quit because they don't want to assume the risk anymore because it took so much bandwidth. And then they just got beat down because of that failure component, X dollar amount or something like that. Instead, putting it in perspective of like, okay, you spent, $100K at taking a shot at something and it didn't work out. What would you have spent that 100K on? Tables and chairs at the end of the year? Because you had to punch the ticket for funding. Okay, you took a shot at something and it didn't work. Now you know what doesn't work for you and where to go in the future to try and make it successful. It definitely seems like it's one of those things to where even though there's support for it, the lines that are being drawn are very stringent within those commanders' intents, to where, I don't blame them, but somebody that's worked a position for 30 years, says no to something. Okay, that's fine. Can I assume that risk now instead of that person? And I think that's the real power struggle of the lower levels, is that we just don't trust people. And we see that when we talked about the talent management and the competencies of the fact of, okay, cool, you want us to learn all these things. You want brand new airmen getting off the bus at basic to learn these things. But then you ask leadership, middle ground above them, and it's like, well, we don't trust them to actually make these decisions. So when does that point of trust come into effect? And are we being realistic with that? Because, I've been in for 14 years now. I can mess something up just as good as a brand new A1C coming out of tech school. I just get paid a little bit more to do it than they do, right? But why is that acceptable risk in comparison to a brand new airman coming out of tech school? I just believe that comes down to that trust component. We've spent so long creating these barriers and bureaucratic processes that now we're trying to work in between all of that. And there's just not a whole lot of room. And then I see Brett got on here. He's probably got a pretty good perspective of that as well. Is that the changes that they're trying to make up at Morpheus and A1 and A4 and all these other places are really, really good. To go after some things and try and fail at some things. But when people are trying to justify their existence, they search for that top cover or that no as that stopping point to just say, okay, I got told no, I can't go any farther.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, we got you. Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, sorry, I'm getting ready for an event right now, and I'm hot spotting on my phone because just moved into my apartment. But yeah, good to join the conversation. Coming in a little late to it, but definitely some of the notes that Brandon talked about. I've been in a few meetings this past 2 weeks with A1 and talent management and talking about that, and we're really looking to get after that. There's some initiatives out there that we're looking at, and we're trying to really scope how talent management works and how we can kind of like revamp it to ensure that the airmen that we're getting nowadays in the Air Force, they're coming in with associates, bachelors, some are even coming in with masters. And so we're actually looking at from the recruiting standpoint of like potentially identifying like, hey, like this person scored exceptionally well in their ASVAB, and how can we utilize them in a dynamic way to where they can be utilized outside of just their normal AFSC and being warfighters and contributing to the mission, but also getting them plugged into, senior leadership initiatives. That's where like the Pathfinder program is coming into play. So we're really looking at that because I, share the same sentiment. Like I think a lot of the time, especially as enlisted historically, they've looked at, they associate rank with capability and, capacity. And that's not true, especially in today's Air Force. And I'm highly interested in, learning more about like what you guys have seen and some good products, because I want to bring that to the table when we have these discussions with talent management and how we do that. I know that, we have My Vector now, and that's being utilized a lot more. I know that over the past 4 years in the A4 community, like Port Dogs, like we do a pretty good job of like looking at records and suggesting what they should do next, but that's AFSC centric. How do we get people plugged into the bigger scope and get after wicked problems that are affecting our Air Force? So that's definitely like a high priority and something that I'm looking to, get after and do it as a team with y'all. So that's my 2 cents, and hopefully I captured the intent of this meeting enough, coming in a little bit late. Over.
No, I think you're spot on, and super appreciate the input. I mentioned before you got on, Brett, like the intent here is just if you think you got something and clearly you're in a space to add the value, please continue to jump in and throw those ideas in here. This is exactly what that is for. This is our safe space to bring those ideas. What you said is something that, I was texting back and forth with Austin. I know he really wanted to be here, but he's out doing his normal shirt training thing. Something that we had talked about that you kind of brought up but didn't bring up is, rank structure to value to input and how that talent itself, like the rank you hold is the value of perceived input. But our rank structure in a military was formed nearly before this country, and it hasn't been changed really in over 200 years. And some of the things that you're talking about are how do we identify this talent as soon as it walks off the bus, give it a rank, and yet move that talent into a position to benefit the warfighter.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that like, the intent at the end of the day is, especially when you're getting off that bus is like, it's really, job focus of like, hey, like become the best technician you can possibly be. So that way you can understand your initial role in the Air Force and getting after, like the core stuff, like being a port dog or a maintainer and doing the job exceptionally well. And that talent management piece of highlighting those individuals who can produce so much more for the Air Force that is something that we definitely need to get after, and we are. We've had a ton of meetings. I've been trying to link up with Barry for like I don't know, like 2 weeks now, and every time we go to link up, I get pulled into another meeting, but it's all for good stuff. What we're getting after this with the Pathfinder program, which is like, and I'm representing, like, it's have y'all heard of Pathfinder? Maybe heard something a little bit about it. Okay, I see that the heads nodding. So it's easy for officers they have so many programs, especially educational programs, where the way the officers stratify, like from every step of their career, you can tell who the top talent is starting at, like, captain, even really before that, because there's so many of those benchmarks that they go through, and the top talent is always benchmarked of like, hey, top grad for this, achieve this, and they get into these special programs, and that's how they identify it. And I brought up in the meeting, for the enlisted side, we don't really have that, especially that educational, those milestones. We have EPME, and we go through that, and there's very select opportunities. There's like the legislative fellows, which that's a very small populace, and there's some other fellowship programs. And so I'm trying to scope out the best ways, without having, like, really, when it comes to talent management, we sift through EPRs, right? We see, consistent, performance and awards, and doing big things outside of the unit at the group or wing, MAGCOM level, that kind of thing. And so I'm trying to make it easier for us to rapidly identify and onboard people, especially to the Pathfinder program, for this top talent. And a way that I would like to do it with, because if you try and say, like, okay, every Levito award winner is like, they're the top talent, and like, that's not necessarily true, because I think we've all been in PME and have seen like how the politicking goes in class and people trying to speak up and be heard. But I think that there's a way for us to leverage, and I'm just bouncing ideas off of you because I was actually thinking about this morning, is like, we look at, who are the people with intrinsic motivation to make good, to do good for the Air Force, and not just self-motivated for self-promotion, but who spends their time like getting after hard problems that doesn't even affect like their AFSC. So we look at, like, Spark Fellowship, who's doing stuff in the Spark Fellowship, design warfare, the people who've been involved with that and have really pushed the needle with projects. So I'm looking at interesting ways on how we can identify those top talent, because you don't get into, you don't succeed in like graduate design warfare and keep going after that, without being a person that meets the archetype of, I'm trying, like, this infinite mindset, desire, motivation to just do good, and as well as having the capability. And with Spark as well, there's people that are doing fantastic things. They're doing it on their off time. And so I'm trying to benchmark and find a way that we can do that easily for the enlisted force and make sure that we're represented in the Pathfinder program. But I want to, expand this conversation beyond just Pathfinder and, look at the Air Force holistically, given that we don't have as many opportunities as the officer corps to identify top talent without, reading through EPRs, and even the EPR system isn't even a good tell. Like, it's, a lot of people, especially with the bullet system, it's how good your supervisor can help you write bullets. And I don't think a lot of the top talent is really represented that well, because there's so many layers that depend on, how well the writing looks and things like that. So those are just some initial thoughts, and I'd love to get your feedback. Over.
Yeah, no, thanks again. No, those are awesome, and I love it. Especially the EPR, now the EPB briefs. Like, I can already see, just at in my master sergeant level of my upcoming EPB, like, just the level of input of those around and above me are already going to have to shape what it looks like, and that's something that we got to navigate. But then again, it just goes back to that concern: are we practicing writing a brief to highlight how good or not good my performance is, or are we already trying to write a narrative bullet quotation to the best to look on a piece of paper? and not actually highlight the talent I may or may not bring to the table in my position.
Yeah. I think a good example of that too is how I know of a person who is negatively impacted. They had a degree in German language, and so on their part-time they were like volunteering, or not necessarily volunteering, but teaching German to like airmen who were going through class and were doing it as like a German 101, but they were doing like side, like, hey, I'll help tutor you or whatever at no cost, just kind of like a volunteer thing. And knowing that this person had a bachelor's in German language, like primarily German language. So the when it came for their EPR and review, this was a few years ago, it came for their EPR review, that was, none of that was included on their EPR because it was seen as a very low level volunteer thing. And the degree did not have anything to do with supply. So it's like, this isn't going to help you. So it has no reason to be on your EPR. Whereas like, how many times does that come up? And those specific minute talents that could benefit the Air Force, like at a larger scale, granted, we have programs like LEAP and the additional language programs, but there's similar stories where it may not be language centric, but it could be like some kind of STEM centric, where a supply guy was building a CAD something in CAD, or a 2T2 was building something in CAD to help another organization, not necessarily their own, because they saw a fault at the port or wherever. And it's just how often does that come up that's not seen in the Spark communities or seen in the innovation communities, that airmen have the talent, they're trying to make a difference, and it's just going unseen because it can't be documented on an EPR.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that, especially with the Eastman's comment about the EPR doesn't fight character. And that's something that like we really need to identify, because I know some hard chargers out there that they do it for themselves and they don't do it for their airmen, they don't do it for their career field. And it's a really like squishy problem, right? To like try and identify who's got great character and humility, cares about the team and team success and organizational success, because the EPR does not capture that. Like you nailed it on the head, Brandon. So it's a very tough problem. I plan on like reaching out to private industry and seeing how they do it at like, big institutions and organizations, say like, hey, like how does your talent management system look like? And seeing if anything, because we have so many like A1 programs and platforms to use. It's like we're, just oversaturated with tools and platforms. So it's like, all right, how can we possibly leverage that? Do we need to make something different? Obviously there's a need for change, or else we wouldn't be having this meeting. So that's one of the things it like bothers me, and that we have all these fantastic airmen out there in the field who have all these capabilities, and they have the humility, they have like the character, but there's no way to identify them. There's no way for Tesseract, for Morpheus, for SSG, no one to be like, this person exactly who you need to solve like wicked problems across the enterprise and defeat near peer adversaries by utilizing more than just their AFSC skills. So yeah, this is just a great conversation, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and what that looks like, I don't know yet. I'm gonna be doing a lot of research over the weekend, because this is something that I've tasked myself with, because I want to ensure that we move on this. Like I love innovation projects and everything else, but when it comes to talent management, it's a certain type of people that fit that mold of like people who are successful in the innovation space because of that character and their skills that they have and the drive. And like, how do we get after that and identify those folks? So I'm definitely gonna be doing a lot of research and syncing with private industry to try and figure this out. And I love your guys' help. And maybe we even create like a working group where we talk about this kind of stuff. I think that'd be great.
I know a lot on this. Liz not too long ago sent me an email to do some research and some interviews from a list of people when it came to that AFSC career development path building, and the exact same thing popped up when it came to the operational field. It was super heavy biased into the officer component because of the availability that they have for things like Blue Horizon and stuff like that. And we have these large gaps in between PME to be able to go after things. The common thread that gets pulled a lot is accreditations when it comes to schooling and things like that, when in reality, you're talking about skills and competencies of a lot of things that might not be accredited through college courses that you're trying to identify. And the wicked squishiness that comes out of that is that the people that you identify currently to be these hard chargers and things like that, it's because you meet them in person, right? So now you're trying to find a fast track to be able to not have to meet everybody that works into these fields and then identify them and then put them into the best places. And then you run into a bunch of wicked squishy problems that come with that, including like, okay, now you have this hard charger within their AFSC that can do all these cool things, and you want to take them out of their AFSC, give them 9i, give them an AFSC, whatever, but their career field won't let them go because they continuously make that organization look really good. So then you essentially have to do, AFPC drug deals to create an environment to where they're pulled out of that and then they're able to be fully utilized, or they have to apply for a job outside of that. So now you're trying to identify it. And the issues that we found when we were doing research on this is that every place identifies a competency or a skill differently. And so you're essentially trying to match the skills and competencies that big Air Force wants to be able to go after these things. But then you get to the individuals in those offices, buildings, operational fields, or whatever, and those skills and competencies and the way that they are viewed completely change from what big Air Force is looking at in that environment. So then it's about what you know and who you know and how you communicate with that who you know to be able to move into those positions. And it gets really, really tricky because then it gets hard. So I think, and we talked about this last time, and I know Liz had been talking about it for a long time before she retired, was the fact that how do we get AFPC on board to create a better movement system to be able to just get the enlisted people into the positions to be able to say, hey, go make change, and we're going to kind of let you off the leash with this to be able to run after things. Because right now you're having to do an exemption, a policy for in lieu of PCS and all these other things. And the AFPC sometimes just doesn't want to play ball with that. And then you're having to get CFMs involved with every individual with that. And it muddies everything up. So the first core component is that when you identify those competencies and skills that you're trying to go after, creating that check mark to be like, okay, as soon as they go to MEPS, let's test them for this. And then for the current environment, okay, utilize what's in place with my vector and things like that to be like, okay, take this test and see if you meet these competencies and then perform interviews on top of that. It's not an ideal system. There's still people that slip through the cracks when it comes to that. It's just how are you, and we see this when we do DWs all the time. I facilitate a lot of them, is that you'll have somebody where it's like they go through something like Project Mercury or whatever, and it's like, okay, they didn't really add value. But then they go back to their work centers and things like that, and they start to see the connections and they have their light bulb moment later. And then it grows into something that's bigger within that. Wedge can tell you a very good story about when I went through DW back in WWNOM. It was still called L4I. But he was like, yeah, I didn't think you could do anything with it. And then we grew off of that because I was able to go back and actually utilize it in sections and see how it actually applied after the training was performed. And then you see things that like Maxwell with Toga and who else? Bill DeMarco and all them as well, and how they develop those officer corps there and, do things in SOS that are completely different and expand on that. And I know Gunter is right there on the other side, and senior NCOA is changing some things with PME to try and bring in emotional intelligence and that empathy component and kind of scrums and things like that. But it seems like it's very, very one-sided when it comes to that development. And it might just be that we need more highlighting and transparency, and not from a PA component where it's like a rah rah join the Air Force type of thing, but more of like a, hey, we're working on developing these things. We want this input more, but doing it in more of like a social media type, LinkedIn type presence, instead of, it seems like the enlisted component is all in the shadows. And that might just be in a cultural thing to where we just naturally got so used to siloing things that we don't even know that we're doing it when we're doing it. And then other factors that come into that. Second Air Force is going through their accreditation review with ASU right now. And they're looking at a lot of those components of the fact of like, okay, accreditation right now with CCAF puts us in a box. And so we're not able to, nothing beats the human connection. It's whether or not you have the bandwidth to create that human connection. And that's what we see a lot, is that we go out to these things, we put all this effort into the human connection, and then we can't move forward because the system's not allowing us to move forward, and unless it's in an individual way. And I think that hurts us, because we want to bring along our network with us and the people that we believe deserve to be along there with us. And so we look at others with opportunity, and I see this a lot. It hurts us because then we smite it, right? We put a bad taste in our mouth because somebody else got something that we didn't. And then we become, petty over it, and then we hold it. And that's like, you can write all the Lance P. Sijons in the world, but there's only one person's name that's on the top of it. And at the end of the day, as long as we identify people like that, then you're just rewarding an individual, not a whole culture or connection or network with people. And that's the struggle, because every time you do that, you might gain 1 or 2 followers, but you lose 10 to 13 others that wanted to be interested in the space because they couldn't come along. So they don't see the return. Over.
Yeah, some things that you hit on, and this will be probably my last comment before I got to dip out. But just some things that you hit on that, when it comes to, you talk about like CFM involvement and everything. Like, for me being hired onto Morpheus, at first it was a no. Like the CFM, shut it down. It was like, no, we're low on seniors. Like, not going to happen. A new CFM came in and said, you know what, like, why don't you do it? And it was because of, and this is where I think the identifiers of like someone to go into positions and work and do things in the ecosystem is like, what do they do outside of the AFSC and get involved? Because that takes intrinsic motivation to go out and just be a part of something bigger than yourself. And so he saw that, doing all the things that I've done, and it was like, I think that this will be value added for the Air Force. But you're right, it's individualistic opinions. And like, what does that CFM value? Does he not care? He or she not care? Does he or she just want to, like you said, they hold their aces, in the career field, and they don't want to give up their best people? That is also another thing. So I agree about creating a system that focuses on you kind of taking that out of their hands possibly, and having it be like, an application where it's like for command chief and for first sergeant, where you get picked up and no one's going to like stop you. It took, I don't even know, like 5 people within my wings organization, my CFM, concurrence from Liz and Dave and Michael to be like, yes, like we want to hire him. And even that was like, when we finally got it done, because I was told no, and it stopped. When my CFM, said yes, it was like, cool, let's go warp speed with it. And then I had PCS orders with a report no later than of like 2 months. So it was like, oh my God, this is not going to complain. Like I, able to do it. But how many other people go through that? And so I think that if we were able to have a process in place where it was kind of like the command chief and first sergeant route, where, it's kind of like, nope, they're nominated, they're going, and we kind of take it out of the hands of, I wouldn't even say take it out of the hands, but just reduce the amount of barriers that can come up for onboarding that top talent. So Yeah, I definitely think that like the approach is maybe, and this is just like me like throwing spaghetti on the wall, is like starting with recruiting, like when airmen first come in, and how can we create a process to where we can work with either recruiters or we can work with TIs or both, and create a process where we can highlight this talent and then work our way up from there towards first term airmen, career airmen, and all the way up to where we have a process in place of identifying it and the routes we can do that and the checkpoints throughout someone's career. And if I think we start with the ground up with that, we'll be able to make progress and work towards the next tier up. That's just something that I was thinking about, of like just trying to do it from a project management like point of view and design thinking of like start at ground zero, work your way up, and maybe we'll create enough steam, and we have the connections with A1 to do that. So yeah, I'm more than happy, and I agree with all the sentiments that you talked about. Like it's the system, the Lance P. Side Jones. There's one name on the paper. I'm personally, I wish that they would do away with individual awards and it would just be all team awards. I graduated senior NCOA in March, and they took out the Levito award. So it was just they had a team award, which is fantastic, and they did have DGs, but that was basically just academics. So I think that changed the environment for the better, because you didn't see people could be their true selves, and maybe we have the PME cadre is able to grade a person's character based on 5 weeks with them at senior NCOA or something like that, and provide maybe a report, something along that route, to where, hey, like this person had great ideas, and they helped their classmates out, they cared about the team, and maybe this is someone you should look at. I don't know, something. You got your hand up. What's up?
So yeah, you talked about the checkpoint component as well, and you might have already discussed this before. Maybe when they reach certain checkpoints, because we kind of had that when it came to the promotion system a little bit of like, hey, you do X, Y, and Z, you'll make rank, study this, and this, and you'll make rank. And it kind of overflowed the system to where we just had like studiers and box checkers, right? And then they got put in leadership positions and things like that. And there were more, it seemed like at lower levels, so it was more bad than it was good. So maybe adding into that checkpoint component will be when they reach certain checkpoints to have that mentorship type panel or board to where you get that individualism. So you can reach out to that individual and essentially communicate with them on a personal basis to get that identity of what their character is and how they build into that. That'll kind of help bypass that EPR bullet. I know it's turning into summary, but summary type component. And maybe that'll help with that bandwidth component to try and relieve some of that within there. There's not a check all to where the system just works perfectly for everybody. I'm not trying to say that. It's just, if you're gonna checkpoint them anyway to highlight them, then you're able to reach out to them and be able to see what their character is, kind of what their answers are, and how they communicate where you're trying to go. And that might create that new baseline that can constantly be flexible, organic, and move, because they might be able to communicate the information well, but maybe they don't work well within a team dynamic and they can't discuss it within that team dynamic. We do that in EETC currently when we hire for jobs, because no matter what, we have to force somebody into the training environment. So if we don't get packages, we just get EPRs on SURF. And we don't even have to reach out to the individuals to essentially interview them and see what kind of person they are. But we do it anyway because we're such a tight-knit community, especially at FTV detachments, that we want to make sure that we're hiring a person that can work within a team dynamic and doesn't have a weird type of, disclaimer attached to it, because they're teaching the future airmen. They're supposed to be a SME within that environment. Maybe they don't want to be with us at all, and they were just forced to be there, which can be a very negative thing, which is something that happens vectoring all the time. Some people just don't want to be at that job, and then it shows when they show up to work every day. So maybe adding that component to it, to where you're not just looking at their EPR and stuff, maybe push that to the side and have an unbiased panel that's able to conversate with these people and say, hey, like, like Barry's never seen my EPR before, but we've definitely had conversations before. So he can, come to his own conclusion and opinion on what kind of person I am based off of the conversations that we had. And at the end of the day, that's priceless, right? Because then he could determine whether he can utilize me, not utilize me, whether I'm a whack job, non-whack job, so forth and so on. Go ahead.
Yeah, just to your point, and just to kind of move forward on that before I got to move out. I think that's why that the EPB was established, because it talks about emotional intelligence, team dynamics, and stuff like that. But it takes people, to be honest on an EPB, and that's the whole reason why we moved back in 2016 or whatever to the new EPR system with strats and having the percentages, because we had an overinflated system. I don't think the EPB necessarily is probably going to change, because people can write whatever they want to. People are going to, I think we're still going to have the same human problems of, not providing like an adequate scope of, someone's like holistic attributes and their skills and then what they did. And there's not enough room on the EPB to write out of like, this is the most emotionally intelligent person. This person works well with teams. You can have statements that kind of align with the intent of that. So I feel like, we have an EPB system in place. I wish there was a way to, just use the system in place and not have anything additive, and use it as an MVP to, just have a way to identify those people. But it takes leaders to be honest and supervisors to be honest. And that's a hard like problem to crack, because, we don't want to hurt people's feelings, or, you can even have, leadership mean like it's not written strong enough, that kind of thing. So there's a whole lot of human centric problems when it comes to that. I'd love to expand on, how we can utilize an existing system and have the intent to identify people who work well with teams, and they have the humility and the intrinsic motivation to help the Air Force. But I think that'll be, this will probably like evolve into, much like a later conversation to how do we get to that point. But I gotta dip out. But thank you for having me, and I look forward to working with y'all and just bouncing ideas off each other. Really appreciate it. Thanks for the invite, Barry.
Yep. Thanks for jumping in late, Brett. I'll touch base with you later. Over.
We will connect one-on-one one of these days soon. All right. Talk to you later.
Sweet. Thanks, Brett. Appreciate you joining the conversation. As he dips out, just want to start to wrap up our end of the conversation here as well, as we close in our hour mark. I think some of the stuff that Brett just closed there with kind of wraps up this entire conversation. Really, like we do have a system. It is changing. We are moving it. I think what happens though too is us as humans. How are we using it? Where are we using it? And are we using it for the intents of the system, or are we using it for our own personal gain within each of our own spaces? And are we already starting to silo the systems that we have in our own individual spaces? And I think a lot of those answers vary on the scale of yes to no, mostly hard yeses for a lot of those. But I think that's the importance of this conversation. That's the importance of the memo from CENSAF to have these conversations. Like, are we internalizing everything, and are we using the systems that are being created to the benefit of the Air Force already, or are we already tailoring them to ourselves? Before we start to close, if anyone's got anything, I just want to say, hey guys, thanks again. I think this is a great forum for these conversations. Barry, Tesseract team, appreciate you guys for allowing the space to do this, and we'll chat again here in a couple weeks.
Yeah, thanks, Nate. Appreciate you as always. And yeah, I don't have anything else to add, but I think it wrapped up nicely. Turn over to everyone else if they got anything.
You guys are amazing. Fireside chats are lit. Yes, I get that it's a pun, but it's intentional. You're welcome.
I'll use it for the next one. All right. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.